I named this video, we need to talk about Red Bull, and it's because they're really intriguing at the minute. Of course, you have Verstappen, who is winning every single race at the minute, bar Singapore, and let's be honest, if Perez wasn't there, Verstappen would still be able to win the Constructors' Championship with his points alone for Red Bull, with Mercedes being on 305 points to Verstappen's 400 points. But I'm not here to talk about Verstappen, funnily enough. I'm here to talk about Perez, Ricciardo, Lawson, and Tsunoda. So let's start off with Perez. Obviously, a lot of people have been slating his performances over the last few months. Now, of course, the only thing that helps him a little bit is he's still second in the championship, which a lot of people would say, oh, surely he's still a good number 2 driver then. But for me, that is just not good enough from him, purely because of how many teams this season have been the second fastest car. And let's have a quick rundown of all of these cars, shall we? So, of course, Aston Martin started off the year with the second fastest car on the grid up until around Canada, where afterwards they had a few good results, but mostly it's all been declined since then. Mercedes looked good around Spain, Canada, and they've been around the top 5 for most of the season. Haven't really been the second fastest much, but always been around. Then you have Ferrari, who looked a bit rubbish at the start, but then picked up their socks around Baku, then also being second fastest in Austria, Spa, Monza, and actually fastest in Singapore. Then along came McLaren, who started off terribly, practically last place this season, but then from Silverstone haven't slowed down, looking second fastest at Silverstone, Hungary, Zandvoort before all of the carnage, Singapore and Japan. And that is why Perez has kept his P2, because everyone has had a chance at that second fastest car, so no one's been able to catch up to him. And for me, when he's only around 30-40 points ahead of the rest of the field, it's just not good enough from Perez, considering how good that Red Bull car is. And basically, it's my opinion that if Red Bull come into next season with Perez and a worse car, it could ruin their title charge, purely because of how bad Perez has been over the last few months. And he will do the same in a car that's just as bad, and that could cost championships. So Red Bull really need to be careful about keeping Perez for too much longer. Now I think he will stay, just because who are they going to bring in? Well, let's talk about one of the drivers they could bring in. Daniel Ricciardo. He's been decent enough for the 2 races he's been in F1 this season, with a 13th place in Hungary and 16th in Belgium. But for me, he wouldn't be my number 1 choice for that Red Bull seat. Yes, I know he's got experience, he's obviously been in that Red Bull seat before, and he didn't disappoint, but for me, we saw in those last 2 seasons with McLaren that he just wasn't actually that good at the minute, and he's been out of the sport for a year basically because of his injury. So I think it'd be a massive jump and a bit too much of a jump for him to move straight to Red Bull. Now, we know he's been signed to AlphaTauri, partnering up alongside Yuki Tsunoda. And of course, we know this is also another reason Ricciardo will most likely not get that seat. And it's because Lawson and Tsunoda are much younger and showing a lot of potential. Why wouldn't you bring them in? But let's talk about Lawson first, of one of those drivers that could be used. Now, obviously, Lawson came in at Zandvoort when Ricciardo had his injury to his hand, and I think I'm not the only one who will say he has been very impressive this season so far. Coming 13th in Zandvoort, 11th in Monza and Suzuka, and of course he got 9th in that Singapore Grand Prix. What an amazing achievement for him to do. No one's ever scored their first points at Singapore before, so congratulations to him. But this is why, for me, Lawson is the most probable driver to get that Red Bull seat contract-wise. And it's because Red Bull have decided to opt for Ricciardo and Tsunoda, leaving Lawson without a seat. Now, a driver showing that much potential in only a handful of races, how are you leaving him on the sidelines? For me, it's criminal that they're doing this. There's also been a bit of speculation that he could be getting that Williams seat next to Albon, but I just don't think that will happen, considering Williams' ties to Mercedes, and I don't think Mercedes would let that happen. He should be going to AlphaTauri, and either they dump Ricciardo for now, or they give Tsunoda the jump up, but I'll talk about that later on about Tsunoda. But yeah, because I don't think he's actually ready for that Red Bull seat. We saw what happened to Gasly, we saw what happened to Albon. This happens quite a lot of time when Red Bull bring in a second driver, they're not ready, and they just buckle under the pressure. But I think that is better than just leaving him on the sidelines. He's such a good driver, you can't leave him out of your squad. Yeah, it's criminal how it looks like he's not going to have a drive next season. But also, for me, Perez, at the minute, anyone bar Stroll and Sargent, I think would be better in that seat. So I think Lawson would still deliver more than Perez has been doing. Then let's get on to the final driver in this Red Bull drama fest, which is Yuki Tsunoda. Now again, like I've said, he's been signed to AlphaTauri for next season, but for me, he would be the driver to move in for Perez. He's had an impressive season in that AlphaTauri, which is not a good car. Obviously, his highlights being 10th in Australia, Baku, and Spa. And he's shown how reliable he can be. If you need a good second driver, I think Yuki Tsunoda would be perfect. If he isn't DNFing, and most of the time it's not his fault, obviously in Monza, he didn't even start the race, and in Singapore, Perez crashed into him. So I think Yuki Tsunoda would be the best option for Red Bull at the minute. Now, they've opted to keep him at AlphaTauri. I don't know how solid that contract is. Like, if they could bring him in if they wanted, I guess it'd have to be dire, like completely losing his cool and just not doing anything for the last few races like he's been doing basically since Miami. But again, it's the same thing I said for Lawson. I think they've just got to be careful that they don't rush into it, because Tsunoda, I think, isn't ready just yet for that Red Bull seat if it was a normal situation where Perez was doing okay. But with how bad Perez has been doing, I think, yeah, Tsunoda would be a better option for now. Of course, would they look outside of the Red Bull family? I don't think so, because of contracts, and I'm thinking of Lando Norris when I say this, because I know Red Bull wanted him, but I don't think they'll get him out of that McLaren contract. And with McLaren looking like they do now, I don't think he even would want to leave McLaren. But hey, what do you guys think? Will Perez be sacked by Red Bull and someone brought into that second seat? Maybe someone from outside the Red Bull family? Does Lawson deserve an F1 seat for AlphaTauri or Red Bull, that big jump up for him, considering he's only had a handful of races? Or does Yuki Tsunoda deserve that Red Bull seat that would be open if Perez got sacked? Comment down below what you guys think. And hey, hope you all enjoyed this video today, and I'll see you all later this week. Have a good week.